Hello fans and friends, welcome to another video. My name's Keir Smith. Today's video has been a long time coming, mainly because I couldn't settle on what has proved to be the most difficult of top 10 lists. In today's video, we're going to be looking at my top 10 favourite debut albums, and there'll also be some honourable mentions at the end. They say first impressions count for a lot. Well, I think it's safe to say that these 10 bands and artists that I'm about to go through all left both a very good first impression and a lasting one. Most of these 10 albums that I'm about to talk about have gone down as classics through the years. But I hasten to add that these are merely my top 10 favourite debut albums. I'd love to know what yours are, so please leave me a comment below. So I'll go through my list now from 10 down to number 1, and I'll also tell you my favourite song from each of these albums. Coming in at number 10 is 10 by Pearl Jam from 1991. And this album came out when the grunge era was at a high, but I've always seen this album as more of a hard rock album. I think this is the band's best album. The quality of the sound, the production, and of course the songs all marry perfectly to make a superb album. The snarling guitar work from Marquee and Gossard alongside the raspy, soaring vocals of lead vocalist Eddie Vedder, they make quite a sound. These are tight performances, anthemic songs, and it's easy to see why this album has shifted some 15 million plus albums in the US alone. My favourite song on the album? I'm going to go with Jeremy. It's incredible. What a vocal. At number 9, I'm going to go with Marquee Moon by Television from 1977. Television had been doing the rounds on the live circuit for quite some time. So by the time they came to recording Marquee Moon, the performances were already at a very high level, and that certainly shows on the album. The dual guitar interplay between Richard Lloyd and Tom Verlaine is a real feature on this album. Superb musicianship. These are urgent and intense performances as the band go through these 8 post-punk garage rock songs. There doesn't appear to be too many overdubs here. It's straight rock, guitar, bass and drums. This is an album that largely slipped under the radar, didn't sell too many copies, so it didn't chart high, and so it goes down as a bit of a cult classic. At number 8 is Piper at the Gates of Dawn by Pink Floyd from 1967. This is the psychedelic masterpiece if you ask me. 11 songs consisting of the more lengthy improvised songs that the band had gone through in their live performances, alongside Syd Barrett's shorter, childlike, whimsical songs. This album is full of echo and reverb, and the band were very keen to use all of the equipment available to them at Abbey Road Studios where they recorded the album. Keyboardist and vocalist Richard Wright really excels on this album, alongside Syd of course, who is no doubt the star of the show. Not to forget the contributions of the superb rhythm section of Roger Waters and Nick Mason. The band work famously here and create a unique sounding album. My favourite song from this album, this was difficult, but I'm going to go with Chapter 24. It's so trippy. At number 7 is the self-titled album by The Smiths from 1984. This was a different indie rock album. There was something very unique about The Smiths. Both Morrissey's unique voice and his intellectual writing, alongside Johnny Marr's clean, ringing, melodic guitars, backed superbly by the rhythm section of Andy Rourke and Mike Joyce. Across these 10 songs, Morrissey's lyrics take us through these difficult and often dark themes. This isn't a perfect recording, a fact that largely frustrated Morrissey, but it's an astonishing album, and it certainly put the Smiths on the map for a world that simply wasn't ready for them. My favourite song from this album is Still Ill, a tune that constantly rings around my brain. At number 6 is the one and only album by Jeff Buckley, Grace, from 1994. This is a staggering debut album that has a haunting quality that gets under my skin, and for over 20 years now, it's stayed there. I bought this album over 20 years ago after speaking to a random guy on a night out in town. And I was half drunk and I was telling this guy how much I loved Richard Ashcroft's voice from the Verve. And he told me that his favourite singer was Jeff Buckley, and so I bought the album a few days later. And I've loved this album ever since. There's a pure sincerity to Jeff Buckley that I deeply admire. And he mixes a range of musical styles on this album with intense performances and that voice. The quality starts with track 1 and it ends with track 10, and it never lets up. Of course, it's a crying shame that Jeff Buckley passed away and that he didn't live long enough to hear his hero, Jimmy Page, cite Grace as one of his favourite albums of the 90s. That would have been a thrill for him, I'm sure. My favourite song from Grace is the final track, Dream Brother. It sends shivers down my spine. Coming in at number 5 is the debut album by the best band in the world ever. This is Please Please Me by the Beatles from 1963. The album consists of 6 cover versions and 8 excellent original songs. And it's safe to say from the off that the Beatles' early offerings were easily as good, if not better, as the classics that they were covering. It was fresh and exciting rock and roll, mixed with some really nice ballads too. Ringo sings one, George sings 2, and the rest is left to the dream duo of Lennon and McCartney. Most of the album was recorded on the same day during one mammoth recording session. And Beatles historian Mark Lewison said, "There can scarcely have been 585 more productive minutes in the history of recorded music." Agreed. And my favourite song from the album is the title track. At number 4 is Appetite for Destruction by Guns N' Roses from 1987. Guns N' Roses hit the big time immediately with their own brand of rock and roll debauchery. The results are stunning. This album is a riot from start to finish. White hot riffs, anthemic rock songs and pulsating performances all round. And special mention for the sizzling guitar solos from Slash. He was my first guitar hero way back in time when I was a 14-year-old boy. Axl Rose announces himself as the new frontman with some superb vocal performances. Backed by Izzy Stradlin, Duff McKagan and Steven Adler alongside Slash. What a band. I'm 42 years old now, so we're coming up to 30 years of me loving this absolute masterpiece. My favourite song from this album, the powerhouse closer, Rocket Queen. At number 3 is Bleach by Nirvana from 1989. Grunge starts here for me. The power trio of Chad Channing on drums, Chris Novoselic on bass, and Kurt Cobain on guitars and lead vocals. I love the sludgy metal late 80s sound mixed with those pop sensibilities. Kurt was pissed off, and it sounds like it. He wanted to make some noise. And the band do just that, but it's Kurt's performances in particular, that guttural, primal scream that comes from deep within him that continues to grip me, even after 100 listens. I was listening to Bleach today, and at the end of every song I thought, great song. And I like the fact that Bleach isn't commercialised, so it doesn't get talked about that often, but it's a brilliant debut album. And to pick a favourite track from this album was particularly difficult. But I'm going to go with Blue, spelt B-L-E-W. Great guitar solo on that. And now that I've committed to putting Bleach in the number 3 spot, I immediately want to move it up to the number 1 spot. And I'd like to say at this point that a strong producer is often so important to honing the band's creativity and sound, in particular on a debut album. And I say that because my top 2 albums were both produced by the great John Leckie. My number 2 choice is the self-titled album by the Stone Roses. What an album! Truly remarkable songs. This album naturally gets grouped in with that late 80s Manchester scene, but this album is far better than anything that came out of that scene. It was definitely a moment in time. It was the Roses' time, mixing psychedelic guitar rock with dance grooves and rhythms. John Squire's fluid guitar playing is sensational throughout, and Ian Brown sounds like a quiet prophet that was going to lead us towards the light. Manny is a seriously funky and melodic bass player, and drummer Rennie was so good that Pete Townsend wanted him to join The Who. This Fab Four unite in harmony, at least on this album, to provide stunning instrumentation, and their influence shouldn't be understated. I don't think there's been a British band since the Stone Roses that hasn't been influenced by them. And to choose a favourite song from this landmark album should have been difficult, but it was easy. It's Made of Stone. The amount of times that me and my brother Liam have sat and listened to Made of Stone and waxed lyrical about the brilliance of the musicianship on that song, particularly in the middle, the instrumental section, when John Squire pulls out that squalling guitar solo. Haven't we, bro? But there is one album that I like more. My favourite debut album is A Storm in Heaven by Verve from 1993. You may notice I said Verve, not The Verve. They were originally called Verve and had to change their name due to legal rights to The Verve. A Storm in Heaven is a transcendental space rock masterpiece, heavenly soundscaping. The band went into the studio with no songs, a handful of riffs, and made the brave decision not to include any of the 3 singles that they'd released prior to recording this album. Guitarist Nick McCabe opts for tone and texture over a more conventional rock sound, but it provides a wonderfully atmospheric backdrop for lead singer Richard Ashcroft's drug-induced vocals. And they range from hushed sighs to manic roars. This album ebbs and flows. It's wonderfully sequenced and produced. To me, this album feels like I'm going through a journey of peaks and troughs, stormy weather and bliss. Every track is either very good or great, but it's an album that really should be enjoyed as a whole. It's a real burst of creativity, awe-inspiring, a captivating listen from start to finish. I think it's wonderful. My favourite song from this album is Blue, spelt B-L-U-E. It rocks. My number one choice, my favourite debut album, goes to A Storm in Heaven by Verve. So there you go, they were my personal favourites, my top 10 debut albums. I did say at the start of the video that there would be some honourable mentions, and I've got a few. Generation Terrorists by Manic Street Preachers, I really like. The self-titled album by the 1975, the self-titled album by Led Zeppelin. The Velvet Underground and Nico by the Velvet Underground. Up the Bracket by the Libertines. My Aim Is True by Elvis Costello. The self-titled album by The Clash. Attack of the Grey Lantern by Manson, and Definitely Maybe by Oasis. But please let me know what you think. What's your favourite debut album of all time? Please leave your thoughts in the comments section below. Please give the video the thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to the channel. There'll be lots more to come. Thanks as always for watching. See you next time.